News reports show that real estate disputes among relatives are common, but I never expected a secret takeover of my own home. When I overheard my family plotting to give my condo to my sister, my pale face flushed with anger, but I kept quiet. Instead of arguing, I ran a hand through my short brown hair, smiled, and let them spend weeks packing her belongings. Building my life and buying this place in my late 20s took years of hard work, so I wasn't going to back down. The big moving day finally arrived, and they marched right up to my porch expecting an easy win. They fully expected me to hand over the keys, but I had a completely different surprise waiting for them. The evening air felt unusually tense as I approached the dining area after a long shift at work. I heard voices echoing down the hallway and paused just out of sight. I stood quietly outside the kitchen door while my parents and sister discussed the condo. My dad was going over the floor plan with a bizarre level of excitement. They talked about painting the living room a completely different color to suit her tastes better. It sounded like they had already finalized everything without my permission. The conversation escalated quickly into specific timelines and logistics. I pressed my back against the wall to catch every single detail of their scheme. My mother told Chloe to start packing her bags for the big move next month. She even offered to hire a professional cleaning crew to scrub my floors before her arrival. They planned to completely hand over my hard-earned real estate to their favorite child without asking. I clenched my fists at my sides to stop myself from interrupting their planning session. Confronting them right then would only lead to a massive argument and endless gaslighting. I needed to handle this situation with a clear head and a solid strategy. I ran a hand through my short brown hair and walked away from the kitchen. My sneakers made no sound on the hardwood floors as I retreated down the hall. I left them to their delusional fantasies about claiming my property for themselves. Retaliation required careful planning rather than a sudden outburst of anger. The silence of my own space offered a stark contrast to the betrayal echoing downstairs. I turned on the bedside lamp to cast a warm glow across the room. I immediately went straight to my bedroom and closed the heavy wooden door behind me. The solid click of the lock provided a small sense of immediate security. I stared at the framed deed to my property hanging proudly on the wall. They had absolutely no legal right to kick me out of my own home. I needed concrete facts to protect myself against their impending invasion. Taking a deep breath, I powered up my computer and connected to the internet. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop to research my local property rights. The screen illuminated the dark corners of the room as I read through various statutes. Eviction laws and squatters' rights were complicated, but outright theft of property was quite clear. I bookmarked several municipal websites to build a foolproof defense against their ridiculous scheme. Sunlight streamed through the windows, making the kitchen look deceptively peaceful. My family sat around the table, casually eating eggs and toast as if nothing was wrong. The next morning at breakfast, I poured a cup of coffee and smiled at Chloe. She gave me a smug look, clearly convinced that she had won some unspoken lottery. I took a slow sip of the hot beverage and kept my expression perfectly neutral. Let them believe their secret operation was going exactly according to plan. The weekend arrived with a flurry of chaotic activity around my childhood home. Everyone treated the upcoming transition as a massive celebration of her newfound independence. I watched my sister grab empty cardboard boxes from the garage to pack her clothes. She cheerfully tossed her expensive dresses and designer shoes into the makeshift containers. My parents hovered around her, offering tape and permanent markers to label everything carefully. I simply leaned against the wall and observed their eager preparations with a straight face. The sheer audacity of their preparations grew more obvious with each passing day. A loud engine roared outside the house, rattling the front living room windows. My father rented a large moving truck and parked it right on the front driveway. He hopped out of the cab with a huge grin and waved at the neighbors. The bright yellow logo on the side of the vehicle mocked my current situation. They were spending real money to facilitate the theft of my private residence. Playing along became the most difficult acting job of my entire life. I wore old clothes and work boots to blend right into the labor crew. Over the next few weeks, I helped them load heavy furniture into the rented vehicle. I carried her ridiculous velvet couch and heavy oak dressers down the stairs. Sweat dripped down my forehead as I pushed boxes onto the metal ramp. They praised my helpful attitude, completely unaware of the trap I was slowly setting for them. The physical labor took a severe toll on my back and shoulders. My mother constantly barked orders about handling her precious daughter's fragile items with care. I kept my mouth completely shut during the entire tiring process of packing their boxes. I nodded obediently whenever they instructed me to move things to specific corners. Every taped box and loaded chair pushed them closer to their inevitable rude awakening. Maintaining this compliant attitude was exhausting but entirely necessary for my final plan. Taking a day off from work gave me the perfect cover to run my errands. I drove past the city center and parked near a tall glass office building. I visited a lawyer downtown and paid him to draft a strict formal warning letter. He reviewed my property deed and quickly typed up a legally binding document. The attorney stamped the paperwork with an official seal to guarantee its absolute authority. He assured me this legal action would immediately halt any unauthorized occupation of my property. The crisp parchment paper provided a strong sense of personal security. I thanked the receptionist and hurried down the elevator to the underground parking garage. I placed the finished folder inside my briefcase and drove back to my furnished condo. Traffic was unusually light, allowing me to reach my neighborhood in record time. I pulled into my designated spot and grabbed my leather bag from the passenger seat. The final pieces of my defensive strategy were finally securely in my possession. The quiet atmosphere of my home provided a massive sense of relief. I flipped on the overhead lights and took a deep breath of the familiar air. I locked my front door and placed the warning notices right on the kitchen counter. The bold black font on the white paper looked incredibly professional and intimidating. I set my favorite coffee mug right next to the papers as a paperweight. Tomorrow was the big day, and everything was perfectly arranged for their arrival. The memory of their scheming voices still irritated me every time I recalled it. They treated my hard work as nothing more than an easy shortcut for her life. I listened to my family's entitled plans and let them pack their boxes for weeks. I sacrificed my own time to assist them with the heavy lifting and endless taping. They genuinely believed I was giving up my independence just to please my demanding parents, but my silence was never a sign of surrender or submission to their demands. My apparent cooperation was just a distraction to keep them completely oblivious. While they focused on bubble wrap and moving tape, I took serious defensive measures. Meanwhile, I secretly prepared the perfect legal documents to stop them in their tracks. The official papers sitting on my counter carried the full weight of the local law. They would quickly learn that they could not simply steal real estate from a family member. The serious legal consequences of their arrogant assumptions would arrive very soon. The weekend sunrise painted the neighborhood in bright shades of orange and pink. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and waited patiently by the front bay window. The large moving truck finally arrived at my property early on a bright Saturday morning. The noisy diesel engine disrupted the quiet peace of the suburban street. My father killed the engine and proudly stepped out onto the paved driveway. The moment of truth had finally arrived at my front doorstep. The passenger door swung open to reveal my sister in a brand new outfit. She adjusted her sunglasses and practically skipped up the concrete walkway toward my house. Chloe marched right up to the front porch with a giant smile on her face. She expected a grand welcome to her completely free new living situation. Her complete lack of guilt over stealing my home was absolutely infuriating to witness. I unlocked the deadbolt and slowly pulled the heavy door open to greet them. The rest of the moving crew quickly assembled on my front lawn. They unloaded the first wave of cargo from the back of the rented truck. My parents followed closely behind her, carrying several heavy boxes filled with her winter clothes. Sweat was already visible on my father's forehead despite the cool morning breeze. They grouped together near the welcome mat, waiting for me to step aside. Their confident expressions proved they expected this transition to be completely smooth and entirely effortless. The atmosphere on the front porch felt incredibly heavy and uncomfortable. She did not even bother to say hello or thank me for my supposed generosity. Chloe extended her open hand and demanded the house keys from me right away. She tapped her expensive shoe against the wood, showing her immediate impatience. My parents nodded in agreement, waiting for me to hand over access to my property. They stared at me with expectant eyes, ready to officially claim their grand prize. My heart beat steadily against my ribs, but my hands remained perfectly steady. I maintained eye contact with my sister and offered a very subtle, cold smile. I completely ignored her outstretched hand and pulled a white envelope from my back pocket. Her confident expression faltered for a second as confusion washed over her face. My father stepped forward, clearly irritated by the unexpected delay in their schedule. The piece of paper inside that envelope held the power to destroy their entire plan. The silence stretched for a painfully long moment as I held out the document. She hesitantly took the thick paper and quickly scanned the bold legal text. I handed my sister the formal trespassing notice I had prepared the previous week. Her eyes widened in absolute shock as she read the words printed by the attorney. The document clearly stated that any unauthorized entry would result in immediate police involvement. I watched the arrogant smirk completely vanish from her suddenly pale face. I was not going to let them ruin my life without providing a slight alternative. I reached into my other pocket and produced a brightly colored pamphlet. I also handed her a cheap motel brochure and pointed toward the street corner. I suggested she start walking before the daily rates increased for the busy weekend. The motel was located just a few miles down the road in a terrible neighborhood. She stared at the glossy paper in her hand with sheer disbelief and growing panic. The reality of the situation finally registered with the rest of my entitled family. The sound of cardboard hitting the ground echoed loudly across the quiet neighborhood. My parents dropped their boxes on the grass and started yelling at me in protest. My mother demanded to know how I could treat my own close relatives this way. My father threatened to break the door down if I did not let them inside. I stood my ground, completely unfazed by their aggressive threats and dramatic emotional outbursts. Their loud arguments meant absolutely nothing to me after weeks of blatant disrespect. I had no obligation to house someone who tried to steal my property behind my back. I simply stepped back inside my condo and firmly locked the heavy door behind me. I slid the metal chain into place and turned the security deadbolt with a satisfying click. Their angry fists pounded against the solid wood, but the sturdy frame easily held its ground. The law was entirely on my side, and they had absolutely no power here. I walked into my quiet kitchen and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. Through the front window, I watched them desperately try to figure out their next move. I finally left Chloe stranded on the sidewalk with all of her packed moving boxes. The massive rental truck sat uselessly in the driveway as their total failure set in. My home was secure and my ungrateful family had nowhere to go but a cheap motel. I took a slow sip of my drink, perfectly content with my peaceful life.